Do it for today on the Washington Journal. We'll see you right back here tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. We're going to take you live now to the floor of the House of Representatives, where the House is meeting now. It's morning hour, and at 12 p.m. for legislative business.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., January 14, 2014. I hereby appoint the Honorable Chris Stewart to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 7, 2014, the Chair now recognizes members from the list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member, other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip, limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No sooner had the United States recognized the failure of alcohol prohibition by repealing the 18th Amendment than the United States embarked upon another failed experiment in prohibition, marijuana. For 3/4 of a century, the United States has waged a futile attempt to prohibit marijuana based upon emotion and flawed science. Since 1971, the federal government has classified marijuana as a Schedule I prohibited substance, like heroin, more dangerous, according to the law, than cocaine or meth. It declared in statute, contrary to proven research, that marijuana has no therapeutic value. Every day, 1 million authorized users of medical marijuana reject that notion by using it by doctor's prescription to relieve symptoms like intense nausea due to chemotherapy, relief for veterans with PTSD, from chronic back pain, and neurological disorders like multiple sclerosis. New York has now joined 21 other states and the District of Columbia authorizing medical marijuana. Colorado is now allowing adult use, and Washington State is soon to follow after strong approval by both states' voters. The revolution in medical marijuana policy has been led at the state level, usually as a result of popular vote. The facts are that marijuana does have therapeutic use. It is less destructive to human health than alcohol or tobacco. Not one death has ever been proven from a marijuana overdose, yet it continues to disrupt the lives of more than 2/3 of a million people arrested each year. We send billions of dollars into the hands of the underworld and drug cartels. And many people know that it's easier for a 13-year-old girl to buy a joint than a six-pack of beer. No marijuana seller, except in Colorado, checks ID or has a license to lose. Even though white kids use marijuana more than teenagers of color, African Americans are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested and jailed. Our federal laws are frozen in time, but the American public has moved on. Majorities now say it should be legal, and even more say the federal government should not interfere with whatever state laws are in place. It will be a while before Congress summons the courage to end the hypocrisy and irrationality of the futile federal prohibition, but it should stop making things worse. For instance, it's insane to force hundreds of legal marijuana businesses to be all cash. We should end the grotesque punitive public taxation for these legal small businesses. It should explicitly allow state-approved medical marijuana, and while we're at it, we should allow the cultivation of industrial hemp, which a dozen states have already approved. Hemp products are perfectly legal in the United States. Why shouldn't our farmers be able to grow the raw material like they used to? Several dozen members have co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to help bring us out of these dark ages. These should be approved without delay. Sometime this decade, we will tax and regulate marijuana until we end the unfair, discriminatory, and costly federal prohibition, we should at least end the most foolish and counterproductive policies.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Rosenthal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the memory of Frances Rohr Sargent, a courageous woman who selflessly helped defend our country during World War II. Being a member of the renowned Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP, Frances pushed beyond the boundaries that limited opportunities at that time for women of her generation. The Women Air Force Service Pilots were the first women to fly military aircraft, flying non-combat operations between the years 1942 and 1944. These pioneers paved the way for women pilots to fly nearly every type of military aircraft, from the F-A-18 to the Space Shuttle today. My daughter-in-law, Lindsay, flew combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan for the Marines, but she would not have been able to do so without the women who came before her, Frances and all the other members of WASP. Frances had a fulfilled life. She began flying at the age of 22 in Atlanta and would come to be one of only 1,704 women who were accepted to the prestigious Women Air Force Service Pilots, WASP, out of the more than 25,000 women who had applied for the program. Frances and other female pilots from our South Florida community, including Helen Wyatt Snap, Ruth Schaefer, Fleischer Shirley Cruz, and Bee Haydu, flew more than 60 million miles between 42 and 44. As the author of the legislation awarding WASP the Congressional Gold Medal in the year 2009, I had the privilege to present the award to Frances Sargent for her patriotic service. The Congressional Gold Medal, as we know, is the highest civilian award in the United States, and it was presented to these women who were the first females to ever fly military aircraft. Their missions were mainly composed of safeguarding the U.S. coastal line so that the male pilots could take on combat roles abroad. Quite often, Frances's life and that of her colleagues were on the line with constant attacks from enemy forces. The service of the WASP to the U.S. military greatly contributed to the triumph and success of the U.S. and our allies in the defeat of the Axis powers during World War II. Frances's deep passion for flying is what led her to pursue flight and became part of the prestigious WASP. She never sought to break the barriers for women, but through her service, she demonstrated her excellent skills that made her as well qualified a pilot as any of the male pilots in the military. Without her success and that of her many other female pilots, more opportunities then became available for women in all fields. After her retirement from WASP, Frances continued her love of flying by passing on her skills that she had gained. She became a professor in my alma mater, Miami-Dade College, where she took charge of developing the aviation program. South Florida has been blessed to have had true heroines like Frances Rohr Sargent, and we honor the service of her and her fellow South Florida WASP patriots, Helen Wyatt Snap, Ruth Schaefer, Fleischer Shirley Cruz, and Bee Haydu. Aim high, fly, fight, and win. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen, yields back. Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 7 months ago, the Senate passed a bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill. And for 7 months, we have waited. We have taken over 600 votes in the House of Representatives this Congress, finding the time to vote 46 times to overturn Obamacare, finding the time to pass 9 bills that harm our environment, finding the time to twice pass bills that weaken our education system, finding the time to rename 40 post offices. But we haven't taken one vote, not a single vote, to advance immigration reform. We simply haven't found the time. This despite the support of an overwhelming majority of Americans. This despite the support of interests as varied as labor unions and the Chamber of Commerce, law enforcement and civil liberties groups, high-tech companies, and faith leaders. This despite the CBO reporting that immigration reform will provide a much-needed jolt to the American economy. With over half of the 113th Congress behind us, we've ignored one of the signature issues that the American people sent us here to solve. Sure, we've talked about immigration reform. We've even had our gang of 8 on this side of the Capitol, but as the old saying goes, talk is cheap. But months of discussions by this Congress on one of the most important and complex issues in a generation have yielded only one point and one point only. The only thing we decided so far that is if we take on this issue, if we pass immigration reform, we will do it piece by piece. That's it. That's the only progress this body has made on this critical issue. We've made no substantive decisions about the fate of over 11 million people currently living their lives in legal limbo in this country. No substantive decisions about whether their children, many of whom know no other country than this, will be sent thousands of miles away to live in a foreign country, separated from their families, denied the American dream they've fought so hard for, or even whether LGBT families will be torn apart. The only progress we can point to at this time is instead of one large bill, we've decided on several small bills. If that's not definitive of a do-nothing Congress, I don't know what is. But okay, Mr. Speaker, you've convinced the President. If piecemeal is the only way we're going to pass immigration reform, then piecemeal it is. But here's the most important point. Where are the pieces? See, here's the thing. Even if you're going to do something on a piecemeal basis, you've still got to do the first piece. And the second problem with a piecemeal approach is that you run the risk of cherry picking, pushing through issues like increased border security and more high-tech visas, while ignoring the harder decisions like providing a path to citizenship for the millions living in the shadows. My friends on the other side of the aisle have introduced several immigration bills this Congress, with a few of them even passing out of committee. But not one bill has offered that comes close to offering a pathway to citizenship. While we may accept a piecemeal approach for the sake of getting something done, what we cannot accept, what we will not accept, is an approach that leaves a pathway to citizenship on the sidelines. Because the pathway to citizenship remains the cornerstone of any serious immigration reform plan. The rest of the immigration reform structure is built around that piece. Without it, immigration reform will not stand. Without it, our system will remain broken. The American people have called on us to fix our broken immigration system. At the very least, we owe it to them to give it a try. The window is still open. The opportunity is still there. We simply need to find the courage to complete the task. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Obama administration has repeatedly asserted their regulations on coal-fired power plants will not be a death blow to the industry. Unfortunately, the Environmental Protection Agency's most recently published rule for new coal-fired power plants tells us this claim could not be further from the truth. The administration asserts this regulation on new coal-fired plants will make use of, and I quote, adequately demonstrated, end quotes, technologies. Well, according to the Washington Examiner's editorial board, and I quote, federal law has long barred the EPA from mandating industry use of technology that has not been adequately demonstrated as ready for commercial use. It is simply ludicrous for the EPA to claim in its proposed new rule that CCS technology has reached such a point, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, this administration is dead set on eliminating coal from our fuel mix without a plan to make up for the energy that it provides or the jobs that it supports. It's an anti-energy agenda that's costing jobs, harming economic growth, and placing a greater burden on family budgets. The American people deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kuptur, for 5 minutes.
To include extraneous material in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I am privileged to rise to honor a man who made a difference. I wish to pay tribute to the extraordinarily generous life of American patriot Eddie Boggs. an exceptional educator and music man from Sylvania, Ohio, and Toledo. Eddie was a man held in particular affection by the thousands of people whose lives he touched so positively. Some said his being embodied the Midwestern caring spirit we each wish that we could emanate to those whose paths we cross. Eddie was actually born in Soldier, Kentucky, and came north to attend the University of Toledo, where he received his master's degree and devoted his life to his family. He was a musician and a composer, a great humanitarian, an indefatigable social studies teacher, recognized as Educator of the Year in 2005. The Toledo Blade says of his life, his smile, his sparkling blue eyes, his servant's heart, and infectious love of life is the Eddie that we remember. He was an educator on so many levels. For nearly 4 decades, inspiring and caring about thousands and thousands of his students and fellow citizens. Even after retiring from teaching, he did not really stop working. Eddie became a licensed tour guide. An engaged citizen, he made the extra effort year after year when he was a teacher and afterwards to bring hundreds and hundreds of students from Timberstone Junior High, for example, to visit the Capitol. It was always a grand and unforgettable occasion. Eddie would stand outside the East Frontier with his guitar, winding his way among hundreds and hundreds of students, and begin singing as his resonant and clear voice would filter across the Capitol lawn. It always seemed the sun was shining as the students gathered under the oak trees and the linden trees. These were unforgettable moments. In Eddie's so-called retirement, he also furthered his love of music by performing nationally with the New Christy Minstrels. He composed songs of his own, played over 1,000 songs. The music never stopped. He was one of the best-known entertainers in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan. Eddie's wife, Chris, stated, "Eddie got 26 hours out of a 24-hour day." That's the way Eddie was, a positive man. In addition to teaching and performing, Eddie contributed mightily to the community through fundraising, and during the Christmas season would organize a Christmas variety show that would raise more than $250,000 for area charities. This man was a real citizen. Mr. Speaker, it is a gift for us who had the joy of knowing him and sharing in his life, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family, his wife Chris, his daughters Allison, Sarah, and Grace, his grandchildren Landon, Jackson, Kate, Grant, and Nola, his mother Pearl and mother-in-law Pat, his brothers and sisters and extended family. Eddie's music will always play. It will play in our hearts. He lifted us to be a better and more caring people. May God give his family comfort, and may Eddie's life inspire others to emulate his goodness. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, for 5 minutes.
Requested and asked consent to address the House for 5 minutes to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Adam Soders, Sergeant Investigator with the Burleson County Sheriff's Department. On December 19, 2013, Sergeant Soders was killed in the line of duty. Sergeant Investigator Soders passed away due to wounds he received while serving a search warrant with a team of deputies in Burleson County, Texas. Adam graduated from Somerville High School in 2001. And like his father and his brothers, he became a volunteer firefighter at the Somerville Fire Department. He began his career with the Burleson County Sheriff's Department as a patrol deputy in 2006 after serving as an officer with the Somerville Police Department. Sergeant Investigator Soders was loved and respected by his community and by his friends and his family, and our thoughts and prayers are with his family and his friends. Today we honor and remember Adam for putting himself in harm's way for the good of his neighbors, his family, his friends, and his community. We thank him for his service and his sacrifice for public safety. He devoted his life to public safety and to being a first responder, and he will be forever remembered as an outstanding individual who lived to selflessly serve his community. Adam was a model public servant. However, and more importantly, he was a servant leader who modeled the words of Jesus in John 15:13, which state, "Greater love hath no man than this, than he who laid down his life for his friends." His death marks the 17th first responder lost in the line of duty in the 17th Congressional District of Texas since the time I was sworn in January of 2011. Mr. Speaker, I would like to close by reminding all Americans to continue praying for our country and for our American men and women who serve in our military and for our first responders. Their selfless service protects our lives, our freedoms, and our liberties from both internal and external dangers. God bless our first responders and our troops, and God bless America. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to show my support for the reinstatement of emergency unemployment insurance for thousands of residents in the Inland Empire and millions of other Americans across the nation. These Americans rely on these benefits so they can put food on their table, so they can pay for heat, and so they can continue their search for work. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle will have you believe that these millions of Americans are just too lazy to find work and that they are only interested in handouts. My Republican colleagues believe in making the long-term unemployed more desperate, and that this desperation will be the necessary motivation for them to find work. Well, when has an unpaid gas bill ever created a job? When has forcing someone to go to sleep hungry ever created a job? Let me remind my colleagues that the Great Recession was the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and that there are still 3 people competing for every job opening. While our recovery is gaining momentum, it has been the wealthiest that have benefited the most, leaving far too many Americans behind. Let's extend these emergency benefits for the long-term unemployed. Let's create jobs, not desperation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.